I'm going to begin with some introductions of our three incredibly talented writers and authors. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of a blurb about their novels, and then we're going to go straight into it. First of all, Fiona Britton, over there, is the author of Violet Kelly and the Jade Owl, a Sydney writer living and working on Bidjigal land. Fiona has a PhD in creative writing from the University of Western Australia. Her short stories and poetry have been published in literary journals in Australia and overseas. And while waiting to be an overnight success, Fiona has worked as a chip fryer, a clown doctor, an aerialist, a hula hooper, stilt walker, and as an editor, writer, and communications manager for business. Her bio reads, Fiona likes stories about funny, fearless women who get to have it all. And she absolutely nailed it with Violet Kelly. Her book, Violet Kelly and the Jade Owl, is set in King's Cross in the 1930s. It's wry, it's sometimes poignant, and it is a very entertaining romp, underpinned by social observation and critique, in the tradition of Miss Fisher. Although the plucky Violet, and I won't say too much more about her, is from a different social background and a very different profession. Elizabeth Coleman is the author of A Routine Infidelity. As well as a successful screenwriter and playwright, her hit play screen Secret Bridesmaids Business was adapted into a telemovie, the eponymous 2019 TV series for Seven, and it's being developed into a new US format. Fantastic. She co-created the much-loved ABC drama Bed of Roses and, wait for it, more recently wrote on every season of Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries and Miss Fisher's Modern Murder Mysteries. Described by none other than Kerry Greenwood as clever plotting and memorable characters, extraordinary praise from Kerry Greenwood, this book is a delightfully sharp and clever murder mystery, perfect for fans of Richard Osman. Elizabeth's private investigator, Edwina Bristol, and her miniature schnauzer, Miss Marple, who I loved as well, deal in the cheating husbands of Melbourne. But when faced with the heart-stopping excitement of real crime, is Ted ready for it? And I am so excited and barely ready for book number 2, which I'm going to get you to hold up if you've got it there. Because we're going to talk about book 1, but book 2 is well on its way.
January 3.
January, okay.
Perfect summer holiday reading.
It is. It really is. And then Sarah Smith, finally, thank you for waiting, Sarah, is the author of 12 Steps to a Long and Fulfilling Death. My children want to know why I didn't talk to them on my last holiday. It's because I was reading that one. As well as one of Australia's most experienced TV drama writers and showrunners. Her credits include, wait for it, Amazing Grace, Bite Club, Love Child, House of Bond, Winter, Wild Boys, Rescue Special Ops, Dripping in Chocolate, All Saints, and McLeod's Daughters. Honestly, where'd you get the time and talent? Sarah lives in Sydney and is currently writing her second novel. Again, I'm delighted. Sarah's book, 12 Steps to a Long and Fulfilling Death, is a dark comedy about how to live your best life even when you're dead. Our protagonist, Stacey, poor Stacey. Stacey's spirit hasn't passed on after she was killed in a car accident. Or was it a car accident? The detectives certainly think that it may have been murder, and so does Stacey, whose ghost lingers and examines her past relationships, looking for her own killer, as well as closure on people that I think she might have been better off without, Sarah. So, to crime and crime with a smile. If not, in fact, that is misleading. It is crime with laugh out loud humour. So, as is often the way with crime in this genre, the propulsiveness of crime, and in your novels, is in those high-stake plots. It's in the twists and the turns, it's in the following of the clues, and the things that you didn't see coming, and ultimately the whodunit. But the strength of crime, I think, and is I think perhaps the way with all novels, really, is in its characters. Yours are all drawn realistically and believably. Your protagonists are smart and funny, with complex lives and heavy emotional burdens. So I want to kick off with a reading of Elizabeth's Ted. So Elizabeth Coleman, protagonist Ted. All 3 books are available at the bookshop afterwards. And I want you to tell us, in fact, I won't even get you to contextualize. Just read us so we can get a little bit of an introduction to Ted.
Okay. It was tricky to pick a section actually because I'm worried about spoilers. So this is an early section. Ted has been overseas for 15 years trying to escape family issues and her own issues that are kind of blocking her in relationships and things. She's come back, she's been forced to come back, and she's decided to get a miniature schnauzer. I beg your pardon. She's just decided to get a dog. So I'm just going to read the section where she meets Miss Marple, who becomes the most important person in her life, who's not a person. This is immediately after Ted's had a meeting with a client who's kind of pushed some of her personal buttons, and so she wasn't as professional as she would have liked to be. And Miss Marple, she's picking Miss Marple up from Wags Away Canine Daycare, which is across the road. Ted was still mad with herself when she crossed the road 20 minutes later and opened the rear door to Wags Away. There was no excuse for insulting a client, no matter what they did for a living. And how was she going to grow the business if she couldn't control her personal feelings? She wondered how many potential cases she'd lose if Chantal trashed Edwina Bristol investigations on Google. Just because she hadn't yet, Ted had been checking every 5 minutes, it didn't mean she wouldn't. She stepped inside Wags Away and closed the door behind her. Barks echoed through the building and a smile found her in spite of everything. Her thoughts flew back to a past gig as a dog walker in Paris and one particularly snooty poodle called Andre who tried to mess with her head. Ha! When was that? 6 years ago? 7? It was hard to keep count. Her 15 crazy, amazing years in Europe, working as a dog walker, Kentucky tour guide, Uber driver and beer puller were all a bit of a blur now. The only memory still in sharp relief was that awesome feeling of being on the opposite side of the world from home. Woof! Woof! That scrappy bark cut through the rest and brought her back to the present. Miss Marple quickened her step to the small dog's room. When she'd returned to Australia 3 years ago, it had seemed like owning a dog might help her settle down. She'd gone to the RSPCA in search of a kick-ass breed, like a German shepherd, but all the dogs, even the big ones, had wagged their tails at her needily, as if to say, "Please pick me, I'm so lovable." All except for a miniature schnauzer who'd regarded Ted dispassionately, as though she, the dog, were doing the choosing. It had earned Ted's instant respect. This schnauzer was clearly kick-ass, regardless of her size. She was Coco then, but Ted had rechristened her Miss Marple, and Miss Marple had taken to her new name instantly, as if she understood the compliment implicit in its provenance. Miss Marple was 6 kilos of pure muscle, with a grey coat enhanced by a fluffy white beard and chest. Her ears stood upright and then flopped over themselves. Right from the start, her alert brown eyes had communicated with Ted in surprisingly conversational detail. At first, Ted had wondered if she was anthropomorphising, but now she'd stopped asking herself the question. She walked into the small dog's room and felt a familiar rush of delight when she saw Miss Marple's inquisitive little face. But she knew better than to let that show. Miss Marple was always pleased to see Ted, but she played it cool, which was cool by Ted. Early today, Laura, the chief canine carer, observed in her characteristically friendly fashion as she retrieved Miss Marple's lead from a hook on the wall. "Yeah," Ted smiled, "we've got an assignment." "An assignment? How exciting." "Go get him, Miss Marple," Laura said. Miss Marple waved her fluffy tail politely, but her eyes said, "Cool your jets, it's no biggie." Ted took Miss Marple's lead from Laura and clipped it onto her harness. "Thanks, Laura. Have a great weekend." Ted and Miss Marple emerged into the nascent spring sunshine. Ted unlocked the blue racing bike she rode to work when she didn't need her SUV for surveillance. She deposited Miss Marple into the cane basket she'd attached to the handlebars. And the effect was a bit cutesy for Ted's taste, but the basket was perfectly sized for Miss Marple's proportions. Ted slung her backpack over her shoulders. "Let's do this, eh?" Miss Marple metaphorically raised her thumb. And that's the intro to Miss Marple.
So good, thank you. So we've got this edgy PI, with a love for role-play games and such tenderness and, in fact, intellectualism between her and her schnauzer.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have got Fiona's plucky 1930s person, still not giving you any more information on her until Fiona does her reading. And then we've got Sarah and this ghost with issues. Okay? So I'd love to know from all three of you about the inspiration for your characters and the construction of them. Did you find that the voices, they all have very strong voices, did you find that the voices were just naturally asserting themselves? Did you construct them? Was it conscious? So we'll start maybe with Ted and go from there.
It's interesting. Ted is completely different to me, and I was interested in writing a character completely different to me, trying to get into their head, which is not different to me in the sense that she's vulnerable and she's got issues, who hasn't, but she's not afraid of a fight, and she's kind of really gutsy, and I'm a bit of a people pleaser and do anything to avoid an argument. So I found it a lot of fun getting inside her head, getting inside the head of somebody who was so different, and I loved her. I love her for her vulnerability, and I love her for her guts and her tenacity, I should say. And it did take a while, you know, it took a little while. At first she was too rigid, and then I thought, I was trying to write this subtext, but because in my original incarnation with her, I didn't want her to be aware of anything going on. I wanted her to be damaged, but not consciously aware of that. But it was really interesting because when I tried to write that, it just came across as really shallow because I couldn't put the subtext in because Ted wasn't even aware she was damaged. So once I realised that it's okay for her to know and still not be courageous enough to do anything about it yet, that made it a lot easier, and then the character became much fuller and more complete, I think.
Yeah, and it's an interesting contradiction with her that she's so brave and brazen, really ready for a fight, almost too ready for a fight at times.
Well, exactly, yes.
And at the same time, so not yet ready to address those issues, and really works hard to find her ways around the emotional damage that every protagonist in a crime novel has to have. But she wears it very well and very engagingly.
And she's driven by it. She's driven by a guilt from a long time ago,
which she doesn't fully understand herself. And I think what's particularly beautiful with Ted is the contrast with the murders that she's solving, or the crimes that the divorces that then escalate, but also the way you situate her in this loving, tender family is beautiful.
Oh, thank you. They're a very rambunctious, loving, tender family who tend to beat each other up, but they are loving.
And Fiona, talk us through Violet.
So I was just thinking about how I would answer this as I was listening to you, but my sister, who is my best friend but also my harshest critic, says that in Violet I've created a Mary Sue. Do we know what that means? You know, an ideal version of yourself.
Oh, how funny.
That's the kind of thing a sister would say.
Okay. That's particularly hilarious once you read the book.
Well, I know, but so Violet is 18. She's at the top of her game in the oldest profession in the world, in the finest house in Sydney in 1930 called La Maison de Fleurs. Her kind of strength comes from her determination to use her agency and her incredible talents, some of which are physical and some of which are intellectual, but she does have legs up to her armpits, which I wish I had. Thank you, sister. So she's determined to use her gifts to climb a rung on the ladder of life, if you know what I mean. So to improve her socioeconomic status, but then of course she finds herself having to put some of that at risk in order to save a young woman who doesn't have quite the same agency or is in a situation who needs friends and needs to be rescued. So, yeah, I mean, I think Violet Kelly is, you know, she's got some archetypal stuff. She's got that sort of plucky determination. She's got loyalty. She's got grit. But yes, she's also got some ambition. You know, that was the thing that's possibly the thing I like most about her. And she actually arrived fully formed. Okay. And I know people don't believe that necessarily of a writer, but I was trying to write the end of my PhD thesis. It was a crashing bore. It was a crashing bore. It was awful.
What was it on?
Landscape. What was it?
No wonder you turned to prostitution.
Yeah, no, I know. I've wiped it already. No, it's to do with like landscape as an instrument of transformation and character development in Australian literature. Oh my God, I'm bored already. I think I might be asleep even just saying that sentence. So anyway, so I was finishing that, and I was looking for some entertainment, and I just thought to myself, what would happen if you just let yourself write the funnest thing that you could write, in the silliest way you could write it? You know, because I think, you know, I felt that, you know, to be a good writer, you had to be very restrained and sort of, you know, limpid, and I just didn't want to write like that anymore. I just wanted to let my petticoat show.
Excellent. Well, fantastic. And there's nothing limpid or restrained about Violet. Why 1930s?
Well, actually, so I wanted the background of the Razor Gang stuff because it's such a well understood kind of cultural environment for Sydney people. And, you know, well, two things, Tilly Devine and Kate Lee, right? So it was a time when there were actually some really badass women ruling the roost. So in order to sort of flip it and have La Maison de Fleurs, which is run by Madame, who is Irish but pretends to be French, so run by Madame, in a position of power, I just thought it was a perfect sort of setting. You know, there were some incredible women, terrible women, but incredible women around at that time.
And then the Madame, uses her power to empower other women, and
Completely,
it's really
completely.
It's a great read.
Although she has a secret.
But you have to read the book to find out.
Can I just, sorry, just to interrupt,
Yes.
just having written so many episodes of Miss Fisher,
yeah.
I really thought Phryne would love Violet and Peg. I thought they were kind of people
They would
she'd
be
want to hang
allies,
around with.
yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. And Sarah, tell us about Stacey.
Sorry, well, my character did not come fully formed. It was kind of the opposite. I wrote the book, started writing the book when I was living in Los Angeles, and I'd gone over there to pitch a couple of shows and had initial success and was waiting around to, you know, find out about some things. And I was also writing some television for Australia, and everything kind of came to a grinding halt. And Los Angeles is one of those places when you first arrive, you get lots of really great meetings and you feel like you're going to be rich and famous by the end of the week. And then Americans tend not to respond if they've got nothing to say, so they don't answer emails or calls, and you start to feel like you're a bit of a ghost. So I was kind of at a peak, actually, just went, oh, I'm so sick of television and waiting on other people to decide whether it's going to go ahead or not. And I thought, damn it, I'm going to write a novel. And I always like ghost stories, and so I thought, right, my character's going to be dead. Okay, I'll start with that. But you know, then I thought, well, it'd be great if she doesn't know she's dead. And like I said, I sort of was wandering around Los Angeles feeling like, well, I didn't know anybody, and I'm waiting for the door to open or the merry-go-round to stop, and I can get on a horse and, you know, be galloping away. So I kind of was channeling those emotions, and I suppose it came from an emotional place first, and then, you know, I thought I wanted to write someone younger than myself, just because I wanted to have her not fully. Not that I'm saying I'm fully aware of all my foibles at this age, but I think you're far less aware of yourself at, say, your late 20s, early 30s, and because she's dead and then it was a murder, I had to kind of go, well, first of all, I wanted her to be flawed, be an unreliable narrator, so she doesn't, first of all, know she's dead for a while, and then kind of unpick who in my life could possibly want me dead. So that's where I started.
Yeah, I think she has a really there's just such vulnerability to her. You portray the toxicity of her relationships and the impact of those relationships on her and what happens to her so well. And this idea of a ghost trying to work through their issues after they're dead. Fantastic. I'm going to ask Fiona to give us a reading, and then we're going to talk about tone.
Right. Standing by. Should I give a little context?
No, don't.
No.
Don't give it context. Only because it's really cool if you
Okay.
don't, if you go in blind.
Violet Kelly frowned and shifted her position under the Dutch gentleman's stout torso. As luck would have it, her customer had arrived as the parlour clock struck the hour at the very same time she'd hoped to meet Albert. Now she'd have to wait until evening to hear the news that her old friend was so keen to impart. What's more, the sea captain seemed to be losing momentum. Had she lost her touch just as quickly as she'd acquired it? It was time to move things along or risk a lecture from Madame on technique, and that spectacle, with its mangled French and eye-watering mime, was to be avoided at all costs. Bien sûr. Accordingly, she clasped the Dutchman tighter and emitted a hearty moan, one from her catalogue, right into his pink ear. Honestly, the perfect gasp could really put the lead in a chap's pencil. Sure enough, the sweaty captain found his rhythm. After several minutes of this, Violet found herself being reminded of Madame's Delft clock. The Dutch captain was positively metronomic. Violet stifled a yawn and smiled at the ornate ceiling. Before the frustrations of the last half hour, she'd been feeling a particularly sweet sense of satisfaction at her achievements. Here she was, at 18, a rich and sought-after professional nearing the zenith of her abilities, installed in the finest room of the house, surrounded by the most beautiful things. If one can learn the knack of enjoying life, she had thought, then I am a humble but committed student. Now, however, her left calf was starting to cramp, and she was in danger of being winded. She disliked having to try quite so hard. Of course, the captain had spent an hour in the downstairs parlour sampling Madame's best brandy and had struggled to find his land legs on the La Maison de Fleurs grand stairs. Unhelpfully, her thoughts alighted on the equally stout and odoriferous personage of the Reverend Mother, Sister Bernadette from her alma mater, the orphanage school of the Church of St. Michael in Darlinghurst. Sister Bernadette got some things right, thought Violet, bracing against the mechanical Dutchman in a sudden return to the present. Girls like you end up working on their backs, the sister had told her. Willful girls, wicked girls. This from a woman who couldn't keep the excitement from tugging on the corner of her lip when called upon to dole out the Sunday beatings. Sensible Violet had hoped that the sister's words were a premonition, even if they were intended as a curse. Any fool could see that no matter her education and her wits, a girl like Violet faced dispiriting options. Who would want a parish orphan for anything but a drudge? What array of miseries awaited her? A life on one's back sounded rather better than a noble life on one's feet, if that life was spent with the crushing weight of misfortune forever weighing one down.
Thank you. So I wanted you to read that bit because you all did what you were supposed to do, which is laugh out loud. Well done, team. All three novels are laugh out loud funny. And I have to say, I don't think I've ever read funny crime. I don't read Richard Osman and so on. So I'd never read funny crime. And I was shocked by how much I was laughing and how worried I was for our protagonists and would they find out who done it in time. So I think what you've achieved is extraordinary because you have this humour, then you've got this incredible tenderness, right? You've got Ted with her family, Ted with her schnauzer. Such vulnerability and complexity of working through one's past with Stacey, this ghost who's just trying to understand where did her life go wrong? And then back to humour again, always with the humour. And so what I want to understand from the three of you is how? How did you do it? Talk to me about the choice. Did you set off to write funny novels? And they were so much fun to read. Did you have fun writing them? Should we start with Sarah?
Well, I didn't start out to write a funny novel. I started out to write a ghost story and a murder mystery, but the tone came about probably from the first line, being that Stacey didn't know she was dead. And so that tone, slightly sardonic, kind of crept in. And I do find human relationships, yes, you can love someone, but we're all fraught and have coming from a family of, I've got 3 siblings, mum, dad, grandmother, all that. Everybody kind of argues with each other. And so it's, I just think we're the sum of all those, our mistakes and our foibles. And so I think if you can look at those and laugh, but with heart, then, that goes a long way to understanding your character and that tone. Yeah.
And how did you manage to how did you sort of bring forth simultaneously emotional damage, humour, and at times, with Stacey, you just want to say, come on, pull it together, dead chick, come on. And at the same time, you're so going for her. So, I mean, how?
It is a fine balancing act, I will
Yes.
say, and certainly after a couple of drafts I had to go back through and make sure, because one of the first things I was told that she wasn't particularly likeable, one of the criticisms, so I had to go back and go, all right, well, what aren't they getting that I do, because I loved her. So, so it was just making sure that there's always that balance of, like a frustrating character, you want to make sure that your reader's not frustrated, and that they change enough, or they learn enough, or that they do something that makes you go along for the ride. There's a well-known script writing book called Save the Cat, and it's put out by a screenwriter in America who. It was kind of a how-to book, but early on he says if your main character, like, you can do anything with them, but it's called Save the Cat, but if they metaphorically save a cat right up front, then you'll go anywhere with them. So they can be as flawed, they can be as anything like that, and so you just see them have this moment where you go, okay, all right, I'm going to go on this journey with you. So you just have to make sure they have a moment, whatever it is.
Okay, so all the writers in the room, please write that down. Save the cat. Elizabeth, Ted. So tonal choice. Did you want to start off funny? And
Well,
how did you manage it all?
I didn't start out to write a funny crime. That's just my natural style. And the question for me was more, can I fit crime into my natural writing style? That was more of the question for me. And my first draft is probably, I have a friend who gives me really good writing advice, and the best thing she ever said to me was, go with your second idea. Because what happens is, you asked if they were fun to write, and I have too much fun sometimes. So I'm sitting at my desk, cacking myself, making myself laugh, and then I go, hang on. It's funny, but is it real? Is it true? Does it show vulnerability? Is it complex? And so then I'll go with my second thought, and I always think, oh, it won't be quite as funny. And I actually find that when you dig deeper, it's even funnier. So for me, it was that I learned on Miss Fisher, writing Miss Fisher, it's such a delicate dance tonally. With relation to Miss Fisher, which I think helped with the book, you want it to be witty and warm and funny, but you cannot minimise a murder. Somebody's really dead. There are people really grieving. This is really a heinous act. And so you never joke anywhere near the crime. You never joke about the crime. You might have light moments between whoever's investigating and people in their life, but it's never directly related to the crime, because that just can make things seem frivolous, and so it's a very fine line between being funny and tipping over into silly frivolous, and that's I think writing Miss Fisher really helped me with that line.
I think there's nothing frivolous or farcical, because the other thing is you can deteriorate into farce pretty quickly. And,
Yeah, that's right.
And all three of you did not do that, which is then very respectful of both the protagonist and the victim. And the tonal shift is it gives you a release and a
Yeah.
relief from the sort of horror of the fact that you are actually immersed in a murder. Yeah, it was fantastic.
Thank you.
Fiona.
I didn't even know I'd written a crime novel.
I'm just naturally brilliant.
So I kind of just wrote, maybe as a kid you read the same things that I did, but there were lots of kind of those fast-paced kind of mysteries. A problem has to be solved, a mystery has to be solved, a person has to be rescued. I thought that, I was kind of driven to do that kind of thing, which is really the way the plot's constructed, I think, in Violet Kelly. And it wasn't until I took the book in its I took the first 10,000 words. In fact, that was the only 10,000 words I had at this point. I took it to an agent, and she went, "Oh, you've written a cosy crime." I was like, "What's that?" Yes, I know. So yeah, I didn't even know there was a genre. But I mean, I do read Richard Osman and stuff like that, and I quite enjoy it. So yeah, I set out to be. Like I said, I set out to let my petticoat show, to be as florid and silly and entertaining as I thought I could be. So probably the humour came first. And there are deaths in this book, but they happen right at the end. The deaths are the resolution; they're not the inciting incident so much. You know, there's things in the past that come to the surface that set the plot in motion. But so yeah, and all of the deaths I think are paid for emotionally. So yeah, well I hope so. Yeah,
Absolutely. As your reader
does
and
that answer
fan.
the question?
It does. It does. But I also, I want to know a little bit more because there's a lot of social critique. There's some serious damage in there.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, as all three of you have achieved, you do strike the balance between, and I don't think it's at all silly. It's very funny, but also very sad.
Well, you know, I'm absolutely feminist. I'm absolutely fascinated with social histories, you know, social inequality. Yeah, I mean, I did really want to write a book where the girls get to have it all. By the way, you know, so there was an intent around agency equaling success, right? Rather than that sort of Thelma and Louise prototype where you just got to drive your car off the cliff. You can't actually succeed. So, yeah, yeah. I mean, I read it. I love reading histories as well. So you know, the depression, the poverty, the abuse, the neglect, all of it. So somehow it gets stored in you, doesn't it? And it comes out in the sort of light and shade of the writing.
Yeah, and on the agency point, I think I particularly loved with Stacey how she seemed to have lacked agency throughout her life, but death does not stop her on her search for reclaiming that. You know, did you set out knowing what arc you wanted her to go through?
No. Short answer. I started writing not knowing if I could write a novel. I will say I've worked in television for 30 years and like I said, I kind of wanted to do something where I wasn't waiting for other people to give me the go-ahead. And probably rather naively just thought, all right, I like ghost stories, I like mysteries, I wonder if I can combine the two, and just started writing. And I will say I did get to certain points where I stopped and went, I really don't know what I'm doing. People ask, oh, are you a pantser or a plotter in novel writing, which again, an expression I hadn't heard before, meaning are you make it up by the seat of your pants or do you plot it out meticulously? And I will say for television writing, I plot out everything. It's the way you work, and you're usually in teams of people, and people are helping you plot something. With the novel writing, I felt that so much of it was just a really different experience. That you kind of start writing, and I don't know whether you're channeling something or whatever happens, but you kind of get lost in the words and the narrative and whatnot. And then I would get to a certain point, going, okay, I better stop now and do a bit of the plotting side of things to know where I was going to go to next. And especially with a murder mystery from a ghost, I also have a ghost, and I do have a detective investigating the crime, and he is tuned into her because his wife is dying. So he's kind of that thing that happens when you're around death, that you do tune into a sort of slightly different world. So he can tune into her, and she has to figure out who can actually sense her. Sorry, I've just got lost in my own story.
That's okay. That's right. Well, no. Well, actually, I'm going to pause you there because I want you to read about Stacey, and then we're going to come back to television and craft, and the intersection of all of that. So maybe let Stacey speak for herself.
So the first couple of chapters, she doesn't know she's dead, and she comes back to her house, and there's people there gathering around, and she has no idea why they are, and this person she doesn't like is there, and her fiancé, and then suddenly there's police at the door, and she's like, this is all too much, and she goes and lies at the bottom of the swimming pool for quite some time, and then suddenly realises, hey, she hasn't been breathing for a bit. It comes out. Sorry, just to end that little part of it, Stacey was aware that she'd been holding her breath at the bottom of the pool for a long time. She hadn't let out any air bubbles. She tried to, but nothing happened. She must be out of oxygen. Surely this would have created, normally this would have created a sense of panic. Time to rise to the surface, inhale, but she felt nothing. The nothingness of her body and breath and time and fear were gone. She was floating in space. The bodies above the water moved away. She heard the sliding door open and close. People came and went, chatted and moved back inside. She stayed floating while the day turned into night and she could see the stars in the sky sprawling through the watery patina. She watched their radiance in awe. How was it she'd never done this before? How magical it was. Water and sky together, no separation, all as one. There was night, sky and stars. There was nothing and everything. There was the bottom of the ocean. There was the top of the cliff. A police officer was striding towards Stacey. She readied herself to explain. I was just passing. I stopped to help. But he walked right past her, clearly not interested. Stacey felt a growing sense of unease. She noticed a crowd of people being held back by uniformed officers and police tape. A chopper was hovering above, a mechanical hawk hunting for prey. Stacey stepped closer to the edge. Had she been here before? The whole scene seemed familiar. This must be what déjà vu felt like. What's going on, she asked. Someone was pointing, and Stacey noticed the paramedics and police further down the cliffside. Goodness, was that a car? It looked like her car. An old 90s Mercedes she picked up at an estate sale in Palm Springs, where so many treasures could be snaffled at bargain prices, the result of an ageing former movie star population. The paramedics were making their way back up the steep embankment. They were carrying a bright orange stretcher between them, using pulleys and ropes to help haul it up the near vertical incline. That looks tough, thought Stacey. She imagined what it would be like to work in emergency services, getting to be in the thick of things, then wondered if she'd be able to cope with such physical extremes. Probably not, she concluded. She just liked the idea of it, of being the unsung hero, quietly saving lives with no fanfare, her reward be the satisfaction of a job well done. Perhaps later, humbly, attending a tribute dinner in her honour. But as they got closer, Stacey could see the strain on the women's and men's faces and didn't think the imaginary tribute dinner would be enough compensation for all this time in the sun. They were breathing heavily, sweating as they carefully transported their hefty load out of the inconveniently positioned canyon. What was that they were carrying? A body bag strapped to a stretcher. Oh dear, Stacey realised. Someone must have died. Someone in that crashed Mercedes, perhaps. Someone in that crashed Mercedes, which looks like mine.
So before I go on to my next questions about TV, I love to ask this question, particularly of crime and thriller writers. Who do you read in this genre? And who do you love in this genre? And no one's allowed to say Kerry Greenwood.
Or Kerry, obviously. But I'm not, to be honest, I'm not a massive crime reader. Although I absolutely love Kate Atkinson's Jackson Brodie books. I just think she is so brilliant with character. The plots are great, but her characters are so well drawn. And I think she's got Anne Tyler's gift for character, but she's got kind of a more subversive wit or something. I think they're absolutely brilliant. I'd really highly recommend those. I also really like, it's much more procedural, but I really like Michael Connolly as well. I love Harry Bosch and Renee Ballard, and Anne Cleeves I really like too. But,
Yeah, look, I read Donna Leon. I really enjoy her. I really like the Richard Osman books. And in fact, I sort of studied them at one point because I was like, damn, he gets 3 jokes on a page. How does he do it? So I think they're probably closest to the model for something that I would look for, really. But I read really widely, so I wouldn't class myself as a crime fan necessarily. I just love a plot with a lot of momentum and drive. So that's...
Sarah?
Sorry, yeah, I'm a bit like that. I love the book rather than the author. I kind of, and it often is the last book that I've read. I loved your novel, by the way, and Fiona's and Elizabeth's. So I did go through a phase of reading all those hard-boiled detectives of, you know, the kind of Dashiell Hammetts and the James M. Cain. I loved, you know, I loved that kind of the Mildred Pierce and the Postman Always Knocks Twice. I love kind of those edgy characters that you don't know what they're going to do next. Yeah, and so... you know, of recent years, I really liked Jane Harper's The Dry, and you know, I had done some rural crime in television, so I was going like, oh, I'm going to do a rural crime novel. I didn't, but you know, yes. Yeah, I don't know. I think that you just, yeah, whatever's. I mean, if I go back a bit, I really loved Donna Tartt's Secret History. Again, just characters doing outrageous things. I think when I think about crime too, and that crossing over that line. You know, which we often get when we read true crime, and you think, oh my God, how could you have done that? But the biggest fear, I think, is not what might happen to you, is what you might be capable of. And I think, you know, when we've ever had something in our lives where we've, you know, maybe felt betrayed, or you've, you know, jealous, or any of those big feelings, and to think that any of those big emotions might lead to you to doing something where you cannot cross back from that line is kind of scary.
Enthralling, isn't it? So I want to go back to television, which you'd sort of started to raise, and you know, you're two very, very accomplished television writers here, and an accomplished poet, and all of these, yes, you are, and all of these are different, very different styles of writing. And you've alluded to teamwork, for example. There's a lot of creative minds in a room. Poetry, I feel, is, I'm not poetic at all. I feel it's a more singular profession. And we've heard a little bit about why you crossed over into novels and how it happened. I mean, when you read these novels, all three of them, you can actually see it playing out in your mind like you're watching a TV series. And so I'd like to know how, in your case TV, but also with poetry perhaps, how, if it's relevant, Fiona, if you think so, how these other styles have infiltrated and lifted or influenced the work that you've created?
When Sarah and I both started writing for TV, we were writing to commercial breaks, remember? So we had to come up with cliffhangers all the time. And I think that's actually been very helpful with structure. I think that's given me an innate sense of when the story needs to move or twist, go in another direction. I think it's been really, really helpful for that level. I started writing novels because all the collaboration in television can actually be something of a nightmare. It's not always constructive. You know, there's a lot of too many chefs going on in TV, isn't there? So it's very nice to be just in complete control of the page and of what's going on. But I do think all those years of writing to commercial breaks is really helpful in the story.
Definitely we're all kind of breathing in at the end of the chapters of each of your novels, just sort of going, what's going to happen? And for Sarah?
Yeah, I think certainly writing for television, you have to do, you know, it's mainly dialogue. When you write a script, it's which was actually what drew me to script writing. I actually picked it up at university as a kind of minor, and I found that I really liked it. And it's quite technical, and you know, you learn how to break it down, and also script writing is the big print, which is the prose part of script writing, is what happens in the scene, but it's minimal. Like you don't wax on at all. It's basically, you know, two characters. You know, you don't say what's happening in their head. It's all just sort of practical that you then get into the dialogue, and you have the dialogue should obviously have the layers and have subtext and all that kind of stuff going on. So for years of doing that, I think that would have definitely helped with the dialogue parts of my novel. I had to actually learn to fill in the detail. It was sort of an anathema to me to kind of actually start to describe what people were wearing, for example, and obviously then to learn, well, was it relevant to what the reader might be, you know. In fact, my first edit, I was actually told that to go back in and fill in some of the world and the detail, and I'm like, oh, description. It was really, really, really hard. And the other thing I did was that when you write scripts, you give everybody's points of view, and you know, in a novel I was told, oh, you're head hopping, you're jumping around. I'm like, oh, okay, I've got to like recraft and relearn. It's quite an experience to do so.
Bring it back to one person's point of view. But also in that, so it's interesting that you've sort of trained in dialogue, because the internal monologue of Stacey, for example, is so strong. You get because she can't talk to anybody. She's dead. Even if she doesn't know her at first. And so you've nailed that really well. It's very strong.
That's also why I did the pre-mortem and post-mortem scenes, so that we could actually hear her talk as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's also very interesting that you were talking about just sort of doing the dialogue and then filling in the blanks, as it were. I've heard that recently listening to Danuka Mackenzie talk. She's a brilliant Australian crime writer and writes. She's just written Taken and
The Torrent?
Oh, and The Torrent. There she is. And she was also. You were also talking. Brilliant Australian crime writer, talking about doing the dialogue and then going back to have to colour in the story and the descriptions and the so on.
Yeah, we're so used to, as screenwriters, we're so used to the pictures telling the story for us. You know, flash, there's the sunset. Oh shit, I've got to describe the sunset. Oh my God. Yeah.
Well, in fact, if you do describe the sunset too much in a script, people will come along with a big red pen and cross it all out. So, and production people are like, "Oh, a sunset, really? You're going to set it at okay? We've got 5 minutes for that sunset," and then so it's like the sunset is scrapped.
Yeah. Oh my God! Whereas in novel writing, where is the sunset, and what does it mean? What are the emotions of the sunset?
And also in sorry, were you back?
No.
I was just going to say, also in TV, you're at the mercy of the budget. And they always say, you've got a room with 10 people. Sorry, you can't have 10 people. We can only afford to have 3 people walking backwards and behind the background, changing their cardigan. But in writing a novel, you can be wherever you want, however many. Nobody's standing over your shoulder telling you can't do it, for logistical reasons.
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. And Fiona?
Well, I always wanted to write for the screen, so I'm terribly envious of you guys. Some of the best books I ever read as a developing writer were actually screenwriting books, because screenwriting has perfected the art of structuring according to audience expectations and all of that sort of stuff. So, giving people a kind of structure that they're anticipating, and so I've got a lot of admiration for screenwriting. I still love the idea that the dialogue conveys ideas and activities and change more so than internal stuff. I like that myself. But as for poetry, poetry is like writing crosswords sometimes. There's this very kind of condensed information. It requires a lot of restraint. So yeah, quite the opposite, I would say, of what's happening in this world. My children were small when I was writing a lot of poetry, and there's a time economy thing there. Truthfully, right? You can't get your head around this much information when you're chasing people around and trying to feed them and change nappies.
That's also why I like script writing.
Yeah,
I did the
right.
same. I picked up script writing when my boys were little.
Yep. It's really a practical thing, isn't it? So you can polish an exquisite piece of writing that is, maximum 80 lines, but not so much this. So yeah.
All right, well, I want to ask a couple of craft questions, and then we'll go to questions from the audience. How are we doing? We've got 10 minutes to go. We do have 10 minutes. All right, fine. We'll let you speak, and then I might ask craft questions if there's time at the end. Yeah, if that's okay. Do you have questions, audience? If not, I will keep asking craft questions. I'm going to ask the lady at the back first. Yes, that's you. Going me. Yes, please. And then the lady just in front of her afterwards.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Kerry. I'm really excited to be here. Just like to ask all 3 of you or any one of you. So now that, some of you were TV writers and you wrote a novel, how would you adapt your novel for the screen? And what is that reverse process going to be like? What would you cut? What would you change?
That was my craft question.
Well, I'd cut nothing, obviously. I don't know, that would be really hard, the hardest part. I wouldn't find it difficult. I think I would need to have somebody who was dispassionate working with me and saying, no, you can't keep that, but I want to, but you can't. I'm very good at that when I'm working with other writers, saying, oh, look, I know that's a great line, but it's not relevant to the scene. So I would have to be really rigorous with that kind of stuff, which I would find extremely difficult. But I think I could break the story up. I can see how I could break it up into maybe 6 episodes. But yeah, in terms of what to lose, I think somebody would have to hold my hand and comfort me. Well, I'd get there in the end.
As you kill your darlings.
Yes, exactly.
Do you want to adapt my book though?
Nicely done.
Just saying.
So I think all 3 novels would translate so well to television. So I think the other 2, you should answer that question as well. Go on.
Oh, so if it was to be adapted, you mean? Oh, look, I would hand it over lovingly. I say that now. But no, I think I would hand it over lovingly and say, just take it. And I'll go and write number 2 and 3. I think that's what I would do.
Yeah, she's definitely primed for 2 and 3, as obviously are you with your second
Maybe
book,
she is. Maybe she is.
Well, your readers want you to do 2 and 3. Thank you very much. And Sam?
I think probably, like with Elizabeth, I would want to work with somebody else just so that you could. I mean, it's very hard in television. It is really a collaborative medium, and I think that's a good thing. Not too many people. I think 1 or 2. Not like the committee. I would have to try and get rid of the committee. Yes, it's the thing about television. It can be both wonderful, but it's not just the writers in the room who are usually fantastic, but there's the and not always, but there's producers, executive producers, network executives, and you can get notes from everyone, and they're not always the same. So you can get rather schizophrenic trying to address them all. Yes, I would also be happy if someone wanted to option and didn't want me involved. I think, like you, Fiona, I could quite happily just go, well, let's see what you do with it and, sit back. So, anyway.
Excellent. Well, I can see TV people in the audience. I know who you are. And they're going to be signing books afterwards. So please do feel free to speak to them about anything you want to speak to them about. Thank you. Great question.
Lovely, thank you. And thank you very much for the lovely presentation today. I have a question for you, please, Fiona, and primarily, which is the best source of research you found when you were looking into that 1930s period?
Oh, great question. So, the Peter Doyle crime books, the ones, what's the name of the one? The great pictorial sort of A3. It's a crime photography. You probably get it in the bookshop here, but definitely at the Police and Justice Museum. So all of those iconic black and white photos from the crime archives, those stories are incredible, and yeah, I mean, it's like Peaky Blinders, Joan Beaumont, who is published by Allen and Unwin, she has written pointing at you. She's written a terrific book about the Great Depression. There's not actually that much, I would say, sort of academic or historical work that just talks about the social impacts of the Great Depression, but that book is really good. Now, there's a couple of other weird things, like there's a book called Radical Sydney that I looked at, which has some stories from the 1930s. Larry Reiter's book about the razor gangs. And then, this is a bit left field, but if you go to secondhand bookshops a lot, you might, this is a question for all of you, you might have come across those pictorial Sydney books, right? So they're sort of A3 landscape. They are fantastic because there's nothing like a detailed photograph of a street to give you information about your environment that you're creating. What they're advertising on the billboards, what the newspapers saying, the clothes that people are wearing, the cars they're driving, what the tram lines look like, So I get a lot of information from that sort of stuff.
I was going to say some true crime books of that era. There's one called The Shark Arm Murder, which was a guy that was murdered in, I think, somewhere around Balmain, and he was thrown out to sea and a shark got him, and then his arm ended up, he swallowed him, and then a shark, it was back in the day when Coogee had the aquarium right on the end of the beach, and the shark got in, and everybody's inside this aquarium. They had it as a swimming pool at some point, interior, and the shark came in, everyone, oh, jump out of the bath, and he disgorged an arm, and it was tattooed. You actually wouldn't write this in TV because no one would believe it, but they were actually able to identify this guy from the tattoo. And I was thinking, like, imagine if you're the criminal, like, you know, you've bumped someone off, you throw them at sea, like the last thing you're expecting is this arm to turn up, and then they should be able to identify. So anyway, sorry. But it was actually really detailed about that era, you know. So it was fun.
Okay, so there's a lot of furious note-taking over there, and we can expect to see a novel and TV series about this soon. Any more questions from the audience or from question and answer from the Zoom? Okay, all right.
Nothing from the Zoom.
Okay, can I keep asking a couple of craft questions? Because craft is, you know, your craftsmanship is incredible. One of the things that I'd love to know is, you know, what does a productive day look like, and how do you get through the bad days? Because I think for the writers in the room, we have bad days. So let's start with that. How do you get through the bad days?
Okay. I will procrastinate. I have to, you know, have a walk, have a coffee, sit down, do some sort of puzzle, look at YouTube. I don't know. Since the invention of the internet, let me just say, I just can get so distracted by things. But I sometimes just set myself these goals. I kind of give myself a good talking to, and I'm going to do X number of words today. And so
What's X? How many?
I feel satisfied if I've written 500 words in a novel. If I'm writing a screenplay, I'm probably a little bit more, I'll do a bit more, maybe 10 scenes or something like that. If you're thinking about an hour's worth of television, it's about 50 scenes, 55 scenes. So to get through 5 to 10 scenes in a day is pretty good. You get 3 weeks to write a first draft, so you want to give your time. And I think often too with scenes and with writing novels, for me, I have to imagine it, I have to see it, then I've got to find the words, and I'm quite meticulous. I'll go over the same paragraph over and over. I know some writers, I have some friends who'll be able to knock out 3,000 words in a day or whatever. I greatly admire that, because I'm just always stopping and rethinking. And then there's times, like I said, where I've stopped and I've gone, I don't know where to go next. And then I might spend, I don't know, however long thinking about where do I want to take my character next, what's going to be the most satisfying. But I did have a friend who said to me, you know what, even if you write one sentence, there's a bit of a dopamine rush from it. And since then I've gone, oh, okay, just write a sentence, even on those days when you really don't feel inspired. And it does actually help.
Fantastic, thank you. And you clearly have no problems. You don't have bad days because you've got a second book about to come out.
I've always say writer's block is a luxury I can't afford. I tend to keep going even when it's not working. I kind of sort of try and push through, because what I like to do is a thing I call my spew draft, where I just bash it out. Yes. Doesn't matter how bad it is, but it's so helpful to then have that blueprint, that template, which is almost a starting point, but not quite. So, and sometimes you'll write and there'll be 20 or 30 pages that you're almost certain, I find this almost certain that I'm going to have to lose ultimately, but I can't skip the process of writing them. I need to write it all in order to know what to lose. And in terms of, if I'm having a really bad day, I might do research. I'll try and do something related to whatever I'm writing at the time, do some research or something like that, or, go for a walk, clear my head, whatever. But I saw some writing tips from Elizabeth Gilbert, and I was really struck by this one that she put online. She said, on day 1, every writer thinks what they've done is amazing. On day 2, they sit back down at their desk and they read it and they think it's terrible. What makes a real writer is a person who sits back down on day 3 and keeps going. And I really think, just do it, and you'll get there. And even if you write crap, you'll come through the crap and there'll be great stuff shining at the end of it, and then you'll know where you're going.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you.
Well, I'm a bit of a sprinter, and I think that's partly because of having teenagers and a job. So I tend to go away for a few days, and then I'll sometimes write 10,000 words in 4 days, just because I'm trying to. Maybe that's an exaggeration. So, but I'm really trying to sprint to a goal, and I do end up losing some of it. but usually I've spent a lot of time thinking about how I'm going to get there anyway, because there's gaps between the writing. One of the tricks I have learnt for myself is that I have to write my way partly into the next scene, because I find it much harder if I've stopped at a full stop and then I have to rev the engines, think it through again. So I tend to go to 11, if you know what I mean. So if the end was 10, you just write that extra little bit so that when you're coming back to it, there's a hook for you to pick up, and then the pace just seems to come back much more quickly. So that's my trick, and I tend to not get writer's block so much because I've worked myself up to a sprint. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've sort of jazzed myself up so much that, and usually I've had to sacrifice a lot of things and, you know, not be at home to do it or something like that. So, Margaret Atwood has this wonderful quote about the first draft being like a downhill ski. So that is my experience. You know, it's downhill skiing. The rest of it is a slog all the way back up to the top.
Yeah, nice. Okay, did everybody get all those top tips? Yes, excellent. Could someone, if you wrote them down, could you share them with me afterwards? Fantastic. Look, I am going to end because we have to end. Can I just say, first of all, thank you for your 3 brilliant novels. I enjoyed them so much, and I'm sure many of you here did as well. Thank you for your time today and generosity and honesty with your answers. Really appreciated that. And if I may say to all of you, Christmas is coming. Nobody wants bottles of wine or boxes of chocolate anymore. They all want novels by these 3. So please do rush out,
you,
and they're
Shaka.
signing afterwards. Yeah?
Thank you.
Thank you
so
so much
much.
for your wonderful moderation.